boxer raising and lowering his guard. He turned to face the door and stumbled awkwardly towards it. He had to get out so he could complete his mission. The nurse would be here soon with his final medication for the night. Then God would give him the strength he needed. God would get him out of this room. God would show him the way. God knew what he had to do. He would bring them to him. The time was ripe. The moon was bursting with blood. The signs were beginning, and he had a task to fulfill. He was chosen. He was the road to salvation for the sinners. He would bring them to God. The pool of light illuminated a small area on the top of a low-grade institutional desk. A file lay open, a hand holding a pen resting on one side of the page. In the background, Moby yearned plaintively for the spiders. The CD had been a gift, something Dr. Tony Hill would never have chosen for himself, but somehow it had become an integral part of the after-hours work ritual. Tony went to rub his gritty eyes, forgetting about his new reading glasses. "Ow!" he yelped, as the nose-pieces bit into his flesh. His little finger caught the edge of the rimless glasses, sending them spinning off his face to land askew on the file he'd been studying. He could picture the look of indulgent amusement the moment would have provoked on the face of Detective Chief Inspector Carroll Jordan, the Moby donor. His distracted clumsiness had long been a standing joke between them. The one thing she couldn't tease or taunt him about was that he was still at his desk at 8:30 on a Friday night. When it came to reluctance to leave the office until everything possible had been dealt with, she was at least his equal. If she'd been around, she would have understood why he was still here, going over the brief he'd so painstakingly prepared for the parole board. A brief they'd chosen blithely to ignore when they'd released Bernard Sharples into the care of the probation service. No longer a danger to the public, his lawyer had persuaded them. A model prisoner who had cooperated with everything the authorities had asked of him. The very exemplar of remorse. Well, of course, Sharples had been a model prisoner, thought Tony bitterly. It was easy to behave when the objects of your desire were so far beyond your reach that even the most obsessed fantasist would struggle to conjure up anything remotely like temptation. Sharples would offend again, he knew it in his bones. And it would be his fault in part, because he had failed to make his case strongly enough. He retrieved his glasses and marked a couple of paragraphs with his pen. He could have, should have, stated his case more firmly, left no cracks for the defense to slither through. He would have had to assert as fact what he knew to be conjecture based on years of working with serial offenders, plus the gut feeling that came from reading between the lines of his interviews with Sharples. But there was no place for shades of grey in the parole board's world of black and white. It seemed that Tony still had to learn that honesty was seldom the best policy when it came to the criminal justice system. He pulled a pad of post-it notes towards him, but before he could scribble anything down, a noise from outside penetrated his office. He wasn't generally disturbed by the miscellaneous noises that made up the soundtrack to life inside Bradfield Moor. The soundproofing was surprisingly effective, and besides, the worst of the anguish was generally acted out far away from the offices where people with degrees and status worked. More noise. It sounded like a football match or a sectarian riot. Certainly more than he could reasonably ignore. Sighing, Tony stood up, tossing his glasses on the desk as he made for the door. Anything had to be better than this. Not many people regarded a job at Bradfield Moor as a dream come true. But for Jerzy Golobec it represented more than he had ever imagined possible growing up in Płock. Nothing much had happened in Płock since the Polish kings decamped in 1138. The only work to be had these days was in the petrochemical refineries, where wages were pitiful and industrial disease a way of life. Jerzy's narrow horizons had widened eye-poppingly when Poland had acceded to the European Union. He'd been one of the first to board a cheap flight from Krakow to Leeds Bradford Airport, and the prospect of a new life. From his perspective, minimum wage approximated a king's ransom, and working with the inmates of Bradfield Moor wasn't so different from dealing with a senile grandfather who thought